Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session for the day. So today I have a question on a global world event. It is basically the rising political escalation between USA and Iran. In this particular context, a question has been framed and we are going to discuss how to handle that question. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, what did we look at? We looked at Indo-Australian relationship. It was basically a bilateral question, okay, in which India was involved. But this is a question in which they are talking about a world event, okay, and in the context of this world event a question has been framed. And what are the important things that we have to keep in mind when we talk about world events? One important thing is to talk about the Indian perspective. Like for example, in this case USA has killed Major General Soleimani of Iran, and then Iran, by invoking Article 51 of the UN Charter, it has also bombed certain US bases in Iraq and so on. So in this particular context, what does India have to do with it? If it has something to do with it, what are the things that we can do to improve the situation? So these things become important. Talking about Indian perspective becomes important. And if that world event creates some kind of negative impact on India, you are also supposed to talk about the measures to remedy the situation, okay. So those will be the prerequisites when you handle a international relations based question which is talking about a world event, okay. So now I'll read out the question for you all because the prerequisites are over, and then I will convert this question into the usual introduction, body and the conclusion format which we do all the time, okay. So I'll read the question for you all. Discuss the global consequences that can arise due to the ongoing political escalation of the relations between USA and Iran, okay. Suggest the ways that India could adopt to nullify the effect of these consequences on it. So basically this is a two themed question. First part is talking about the possible global consequences because of this particular event, okay, and the second thing is this particular event is going to have certain ramifications or it is going to have some kind of impact on India, and how does India nullify this impact? That is what you're supposed to talk about. So this is basically a simple question, because I call it simple because you can easily convert this into subheadings. How do I do it? First thing is about talking about global impact or consequences, because that is what has been asked. Because of this particular issue, because of this political escalation between USA and Iran, what are the global impacts? That is what I am going to talk about. Then I am going to talk about the measures India has to take to handle the situation. So this is going to basically convert the question into the subheadings of this answer, but I have to do something else. If I'm moving from global impact to the measures that India has to take, when India has to take in the context of the impact created on it. So how about I talk about the impact on India, because that is going to be the logical midpoint between these two subheadings. Once I talk about the impact, I am going to move forward and talk about the measures India has to take in order to remedy the situation. Impact of the situation, impact of political escalation on India. So what are we talking about in the answer? First thing is the global impact that is going to take place. The second thing is the impact on India, okay. The third thing is we have to talk about the measures or the solutions to remedy the situation. Good. So conclusion is going to basically be a 1 or 2 line conclusion. Remember that we are still discussing 150 words and 10 marker question. We haven't graduated to 15 markers yet, so you have to do just 1 or 2 line conclusion. So how do you start the introduction? One way to start the introduction is to talk about the context in which this has happened, or the bombings plus killings. By bombing I mean the bombing of US bases in Iraq, and by killing I mean the killing of Iran general by USA, okay. So this happened first, this happened second as retaliation by invocation of Article 51 of the UN Charter. I want you all to look at Article 51. What are its provisions? Because this could be handy when you write when you write prelims. Okay, this could be. We are not sure because Article 51 is too specific topic. It might not come in prelims, but you can never be too sure. So let's just have a reading about what it is. So this is one way of talking about introduction. What are the other ways of talking about your introduction? You could move by the definitional approach. But in this case, this isn't relevant much, because how do you come up with a definitional approach in this particular context? Because there is no definition as such. In if there is question, for example, there was a question on allelopathy in GS3. If that is a question and you start with a definitional approach by defining allelopathy, this was a previous year question by the way, so that would have been a good approach by defining things. But यहाँ पे define करने के लिए कुछ है नहीं. So we start with the current affairs approach. That is how we are going to establish the our link with the examiner by telling him that look, we have read the current affairs. Okay, so we have comfortably evolved the introduction, body and conclusion. So we will move forward and see how this person has handled the question. Okay, so let's see how he does it. The present conflict between Iran and USA can be traced to the withdrawal of USA from P5+1 deal and other erratic policies of President Trump. Okay, so this is basically a good introduction. So good introduction. I want you all to notice something. So he didn't start his answer by talking about the killing of Major General Soleimani or the bombings of USA bases in Iraq and so on, because those are basically chain of events. What is the crux or the background of this situation that has evolved now? The crux of this situation can be traced back to P5+1 deal and how USA has pulled out of this deal. Okay, because of that, all of these things are following. So I want you all to notice that. So he directly hit the essence of the issue by talking about P5+1 deal and how USA has pulled out of his deal. And the truth is, since USA has pulled out of this deal, it has tried to create some kind of problem to Iran, and whatever is happening now is basically a ramification of this whole state of affairs. So what is he doing next? He is basically talking about the chain of events. So this is basically an interesting way of representing his topics. I want you all to add this to your diagram book. What is your diagram book, by the way? In your diagram book, we come up with several kinds of schematics. Okay, one of them is the tabular form, and tabular form in which you talk about positives here, negatives here. That is one way of doing things. Also, you can use the hub and spoke model. This is one way of doing things. Also, you can go for sunray model, in which something like this can be done. So you have to mix and match all these things in order to create some kind of diversity or variety in your answer. So these things will create value or add value to your answer. So in this particular context, he is basically using a line diagram. He is basically telling me a chronology. The first thing that happened was withdrawal of US from the P5+1 deal, agreed. And then he is telling me that the killing of Iranian General Soleimani by USA, that is another important point. And then the Iranian attack on US bases, Article 51 of UN Charter. So this is basically a value addition. So this is a good enough a diagram. But if I have to add something, what do I do? Withdrawal of US from P5+1 deal. Uske baad kya hua? EU has actually supported the deal. EU has tried to take this deal forward despite withdrawal from USA, because EU did not feel that Iran had to be isolated. EU was in support of USA, but this didn't go well with USA. Okay, but USA was relentless. So this basically establishes the pertinence or the crude negligence, crude rash behavior of USA, despite EU being in support of Iran. Okay, when there is a congregation of countries which is supporting the country, supporting Iran, USA had all reasons to to pull out of its deal, and it continued to do so despite EU's interest in keeping the deal alive. Okay, so possible global consequences. So this is how you can enrich the diagram. So but these A, B and C was sufficient to write about the rising escalation. So this is a good diagram. So what are the possible global consequences? The first thing is the destabilization of West Asia. Okay, if there is war or some kind of escalation between these two countries, there will be destabilization of West Asia. And what does it immediately lead to? It will immediately lead to a political vacuum or some kind of power vacuum in the area, which could be filled by resurgence of IS ISIS and so on. So that is what he is telling you. And then he is talking about the erosion of USA's already poor goodwill in the world. Okay, there is no goodwill as such these days for the USA, because we keep looking at the actions of USA in the past 2 or 3 years, and then we realize that the hegemony of USA has been eroding as such, which is why if you analyze the situation carefully, USA's economic hegemony has been decreasing in the world. USA's hegemony as a leader of democratic values and so on has been decreasing in the world, which is why it is trying to balance this situation by moving forward with defense cooperation with different countries. Okay, so it is basically trying to engage different countries, including India through defense cooperation to still maintain the hegemony. Economic hegemony nahi hai to kya hai, we will still maintain hegemony on the world through defense cooperation and so on. That is one conceptual point that I want you all to understand. Okay, let's move forward. Loss of men and material. This is an obvious byproduct of any kind of conflict, because there is going to be loss of life, and then there will be vandalism, rioting and so on. And then there is a rise in oil prices. This is going to be an important point, because India imports its oil also from Iran. So if Iranian oil is going to be hit, India's imports of Iran's oil are going to be hit, and then it will increase the prices of oil in India. So that is an important thing. So not just in India, it says that this will propel inflation in oil dependent countries in India and China. Okay, because China also imports oil from Iran. So these are the global ramifications. That is a good way of pointing his viewpoints to the examiner. He has given me 4 solid points. Some of them are economic angle, some of them have social angle, and some of them have a terrorist, a defense angle, a security based perspective and so on. So these are good consequences. Now what is he supposed to do? He is supposed to move forward and talk about the impact of this particular situation on India, because once he does that, he can directly move forward to talk about the measures. But he has to talk about this only briefly, because it has not been asked directly in the question. So he has to talk about this briefly. So because he has to talk about this briefly, he basically used a small schematic to solve this space crisis. So he has used this little space to talk about the impacts on India. The first thing is the rise in crude oil bill, and then Indian projects on Chabahar port would be hurt. Good. And then if the projects with Chabahar are hurt, what does it lead to? It will lead to a disruption in our connectivity with Afghanistan and Central Asia, because we go to those places through Chabahar. So that is going to be hit. Good point. And then resurgence of ISIS could be a threat given very large Muslim population in the country. So this is there is possibility of stray radicalization. This is basically an average point, because Indian Muslims are not prone to these kinds of radicalizations. कभी थोड़ा सा lone wolf attack हो जाता है, but then Indian Muslims are largely peaceful. There is enough evidence for that. So whatever terrorist activities that occur close by, or if it happens in West Asia and so on, these have very little ramifications in India, because India is an entity in itself. Our Muslims identify with being Indian more than being with jihad or so on, or religious war and so on. So that is this is not a relevant point, but theek hai, he is trying to make some kind of argument. So let's see what he does next. Measures India could adopt. So what are the steps that India can adopt to nullify the situation, nullify these effects on it? So de-escalation of conflict ke liye it can chip in. How does it do it? Because of its soft power and persuasion. This is possible given that India has very good relations with both USA and Iran. Now will this lead to tangible benefits? Maybe not. Neither USA nor Iran is going to listen to us just because we have soft power or because we are persuasive. This is a really complex situation, but then India can create some kind of mild pressure on these countries. But whether it results in tangible benefits in real life or not, you have to write points like this, because it shows your optimism. You have to talk about these things first, because it shows your optimism, first thing, and second, you are trying to increase the idea of India, increase the importance of India in the global platform, which is very desi of you, which is very good of you, and it would and it will be nice for the examiner to see these points. You have to take these points into account when you write your answer. And then because our oil reserves, oil import will be hurt, what do we have to do? We have to build a strategic petroleum reserves, which India is doing, and then you have to diversify your oil imports to America and Africa. That is another good point. And then he is talking about continuing work on Chabahar port and INSTC for economic benefits as well as stability of Afghanistan. So despite this political escalation, India has to continue the project or the infrastructural development that is basically happening in Chabahar, so that its connectivity with Afghanistan as such or Central Asia as such will not get disrupted. So you have to keep these things in mind. And then what does he say as a conclusion? He says, despite our interest in maintenance of peace, our overall impact and influence in de-escalation may be limited. So this is where he is basically being very practical. He is talking about it in realistic terms. Look, I've told you all above that India can do so much to handle the situation, but it is not really the case, because there is only so much India can do, because the response which we get through our soft power is quite limited. So in that context, what should be the way forward? Thus India should focus more on our import cover, taking a stance of realpolitik. Okay, so this is basically a step that India is taking because of its position in the moral high ground. But these are the steps, these are the practical steps that India has to take in order to prevent any negative effects from spilling over into its arena. Okay, so whether this gives rise to positive impact or not, it doesn't matter, but we have to make sure that this should be done so that no negative impact occurs on India. That is what he is trying to say. So this is basically a very practical answer. So I think it has been answered well, because most of the subheadings have been very well written with 3 or 4 points. You don't have to write 6 or 7 points or 8 or 9 points under one subheading, but you have to diversify your answer with different subheadings and try writing 3 or 4 points, solid points under each of these subheadings. That will fetch you more marks. You have to keep that in mind. So this is a good answer, I would say, and we'll move forward and see the question for tomorrow. What is the question for tomorrow? It is based on internal security, and it is on Chief of Defence Staff. There are articles, a couple of articles in different newspapers on Chief of Defence Staff, because a new Chief of Defence Staff has been instituted and it has been given to Mr. Bipin Rawat and so on. So in this context, a question has been framed. What is the question? Complex administrative problems among the Indian Armed Forces necessitated the creation of Chief of Defence Staff post. Discuss. Okay, so this seems to be the first part of the question. Also throw a light on the major challenges that CDS has to face and the needed way out for the same. So this seems to be a multiple parted question, because the first part is this, and then he is asking you to talk about the challenges that the CDS is going to face, which is the second part, and then he is also talking about the way forward, which is the third part. So 3 sub part तो इसने पूछ लिया है. Okay, so we will see if we have to evolve any other sub part or not. Otherwise we will make do with what we have. We'll create an introduction, body and conclusion format with different subheadings, and then we will evaluate the sample answer as usual. Okay, so that should be the discussion for the day. I'll meet you tomorrow. Thank you.